Okay, folks, just to reassure you that I'm not Michael. And if you came here expecting Michael to preach this morning, then I apologise. But when he wasn't well when he got... Oh, by the way, welcome back. This is his first time that we've had him here for 6 weeks, so welcome back, Michael. But when he wasn't well at the beginning of the week, we decided to swap over with a fortnight's time, and just to give him a little bit more time to prepare and to recover. And I had already got something on my mind to share with you, so it was half prepared, although it'd probably be better if I'd had a little bit more time to think it through. The other thing I want to say, just an introduction, and it's come out in the prayers, that it's been suggested that tomorrow is a day of prayer for the Ukraine. Now, all sorts of reasons for that, which you're well aware of, but it's a day of prayer in that nation. But some churches here have picked it up, and there are some services that be taking place at 11 o'clock tomorrow morning. Now, I don't know of any here, but it's just been nice with the unity that if people are free at 11 o'clock tomorrow morning, if they could pause and just pray for Ukraine, that would be absolutely excellent. But crying out for justice and mercy and righteousness and reconciliation and everything else that's needed, that would be wonderful. Okay, what was going through my mind was, what do you do if you are unhappy? Now, sometimes I have made fun, and so have some of you, of the way that people pray in ancient language. And one of my favourite ones was, Lord, we pray for those that are sick of this fellowship. Now, one of the skills you learn in youth work is analysing double entendres before they happen, so that you see how something can be mistaken before it's actually said. Otherwise, you can end up in a lot of trouble. But let's face this as a problem. What do we do if we are unhappy in church? What do we do if we're unhappy with church? And the first thing we need to do is we need to ask God, where is this feeling coming from? Is it in me? Is it myself? Is it me that's unhappy? I'm unhappy where I am spiritually. Is it that I am unhappy with the church? In other words, is it something that's coming from God, that is a burden God is giving me? Or is it the voice of the enemy who always accuses and is always negative? So I want to start off with the positive this morning. And I want to say very strongly, spiritual thirst is good. Spiritual thirst is good. And you've not got a better example than Psalm 84. How lovely is your dwelling place, O Lord Almighty. I long, yes, I faint with longing to enter the courts of the Lord. With my whole being, body and soul, I will shout joyfully to the living God. Even the sparrow finds a home there, and the swallow builds her nest and raises her young at a place near your altar. O Lord Almighty, my King and my God. How happy are those who can live in your house, always singing your praises. And then down to verse 10, a single day in your courts is better than 1,000 elsewhere. I'd rather be a gatekeeper in the house of my God than live the good life in the homes of the wicked. I want to be where God is. That is a good discontent to have. And you've got it in some of the other Psalms that I've made a note of. Psalm 26, verse 8. I love your sanctuary, Lord, the place where your glory dwells. Or, yes, I love the house where you live, the place your glory dwells. Psalm 63. My soul thirsts for you. My body longs for you. that panting after the Lord that's so precious, so rich. Psalm 63, yes, let me read it in the New Living. O God, you are my God. I earnestly search for you. My soul thirsts for you. My whole body longs for you in this parched and weary land where there is no water. Of course, we don't realize that much of the land of Israel is semi-desert, but they knew out in the Middle East what desert was like, and they knew what it was like to be thirsty. If you know about the temperatures down in the Jordan Valley, down by the Dead Sea, it's awful. It's dry, it's scorching. You very easily get dehydrated. Another one in Psalm 143, verse 6, which also says, my soul thirsts for you like a parched land longing for rain. It's good to be thirsty spiritually. And there are promises, aren't there? There are promises that you know that God has given us. Isaiah 55, verse 1. Many of you could quote that to me. Come to me, all of you who are thirsty, and I will give you wine and milk without price. I'm not even going to charge you for it. But there we have in the Old Testament this offer of those that are thirsty and hungry, able to come to the Lord. And of course, Jesus picks this up in one of his great temple celebrations. If anyone is thirsty, John 7, let him come to me and drink. And quite surprisingly, even at the last book of the Bible, right at the very end, I was looking at this, I thought, why is this here so late? Because it just seems that God's people are already in God's presence, and yet the promise comes through in Revelation 21:6. To him who is thirsty, I will give to drink without cost. And then there's another reason sometimes when we're unhappy, not because we're not getting enough of God, but because something else is getting in the way, and we feel cut off from God. And that's probably what goes on in Psalm 42. As the deer pants for streams of water, so I long for you, O Lord. I thirst for God, the living God. When can I come and stand before him? Day and night I've only tears for food, while my enemies are taunting me, saying, where is this God of yours? Why am I discouraged? I am deeply discouraged. Something has gone wrong. I think one of the translations, I don't know whether it was the Living Bible, but gives the picture of a deer praying over the aqueducts. In other words, that it, in our modern language, it would be like standing over a water pipe and knowing that there's water underneath, but I can't get at it. I think that's the picture as the deer's panting for streams of water. It's not just that it's thirsty, but something is getting in the way. And Psalm 42, I think it's linked into Psalm 41 and 43. I wonder if they were originally composed as one psalm. The previous psalm talks about my close friend, whom I trusted, who I shared food with, has abandoned me. And I think there's a grieving in some of the Psalms, which is a godly grief. Psalm 27, for example. The Lord is my light and my salvation. Why should I be afraid? The Lord protects me from danger. Why should I tremble? When evil people come to destroy me, when my enemies and foes attack me, they will stumble and fall. Though a mighty army surrounds me, my heart will know no fear. Even if they attack me, I remain confident. The one thing I ask of the Lord, the thing I seek most, is to live in the house of the Lord all the days of my life, delighting in the Lord's perfections, meditating in his temple. For he will conceal me there when troubles come. He will hide me in his sanctuary. He will place me out of reach on a high rock. And then I will hold my head high above my enemies who surround me. At his tabernacle, I will offer sacrifices with shouts of joy, singing and praising the Lord with music. Again, it's somebody that can't get to the temple, can't get to the tabernacle to worship, and yet is desperate to do so. And then, of course, 2 weeks ago, Chick, and if any of you missed it, it's once it's up. I don't know if it's Jordan's got it up on the website yet, but Chick talking about the rivers of Babylon. And again, thirsting for God, feeling cut off from God by the effect of other people. So, if that's the reason you are unhappy, it is totally healthy. We got that? It's totally healthy to want more of God. But Psalm 42 also leads us into something else. It's possible that we are not happy because we are grieving over the sins of other people. You can't be totally happy if you're concerned about the state of the world, as we've already been thinking about this morning. There are things that are wrong. And so Psalm 42 asks this question twice. Why am I downcast, O my soul? Or in the New Living, why am I deeply discouraged, deeply discouraged? And Psalm 43, which again is, I think these are linked together. O God, take up my cause, defend me against ungodly people, rescue me from unjust liars. In other words, the psalmist is in deep trouble. For you, God, my only safe haven. Why have you tossed me aside? Why must I wander around in darkness, oppressed by my enemies? Think of the amount of time that David spent out in the wilderness being chased by the soldiers of King Saul. Was he always rejoicing? But he goes on, lead me to your holy mountain, to the place where you live. There I will go to the altar of God, to God, the source of my joy, and then I will praise you with my harp. Why should I go around mourning, oppressed by my enemy? Or Psalm 7, verse 9, O righteous God, bring an end to the violence of the wicked. We are grieving for the sins of other people. The Christian life is not one of joy all the time. If you think of the life of Paul, think of his anger and frustration over the sins of the church at Corinth. I mean, he begins his first letter. I can't even address you as spiritual people. I can't address you as spiritual men because you've got fan clubs for your favourite preacher. You've got divisions over who you want to preach to you. And it gets worse. You've got immorality that the world wouldn't put up with. You've got divisions between rich and poor. You've got people getting drunk at communion. You've got people denying the resurrection. Paul was not always happy. And he ends 2 Corinthians, I face daily the pressure of my concerns for all the churches. In other words, ministry, although it can be a delight and a joy, it can also be a burden. Galatians 4, verse 19, I am again in the pains of childbirth until Christ is formed in you. Look, Galatians, by now Jesus ought to be formed in you, and it's not happening. I'm in agony waiting for the penny to drop, I was going to say. They just haven't somehow grasped the centre of the gospel, and they're going back into relying on Jewish traditions. Even in Colossians, Paul says, I struggle with all his energy. Yes, he acknowledges that God provides the energy, the strength to keep going, but he says, I struggle. So, church, don't underestimate the cost of ministry, the cost of church leadership. That's why there are, I think, so many invitations, maybe commands, in the New Testament. Pray for your leaders. They are carrying a heavy weight. Sometimes they have to take difficult decisions, as we did a few weeks ago here. Pray for them. But also, with a promise of Jesus, haven't we? Matthew 5:6, is it? Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. So, it's okay to long for something better. If you are not happy here this morning, it's okay if you're longing for something better. Either if you want more of God, or you want God to sort something out, that is not an indication there's anything wrong with you spiritually. It's okay at times to grieve. And, in prayer meetings for revival, often that verse in Isaiah is quoted, "Oh, that thou wouldst rend the heavens and come down." God, please burst out of heaven and change something on the earth. It's a spiritual longing. It's a spiritual dissatisfaction, and it comes from God. That's the good news. Now, there's one passage that I wasn't sure whether to refer to, but it's in Scripture, and I think it's probably what I'll call a twilight zone. And that's the reference in 1 Samuel 22, when David has been chased out of Saul's presence and he's living as a fugitive. And it says, David left Gath and escaped to the cave of Adullam, and soon his brothers and other relatives joined him there. Then others began coming, men who were in trouble or in debt, or who were just discontented, until David had about 400 men. Not sure about this one. He attracts a band of discontents. That basically, they were outlaws. English mythology, think Robin Hood. Bad king, react against him, rob the rich and give to the poor. That's the sort of life that David and his men were living. And I don't really want to talk about how he handled it, except to say that he disciplined that bunch of disillusioned rebels into a fighting army that eventually became the army of the nation, David's future warriors, to attack the Lord's enemies. So that one I'm not sure about. But basically, there's something positive in all that. Now, let's go for the difficult one, because this is part of Scripture, it's part of the revelation of God. And it's Paul in 1 Corinthians chapter 10. Now, I've already said he's pretty cheesed off with the Corinthian church. And he reminds them a bit of Israel's history and says, these events happened as a warning to us so that we would not crave evil things as they did, or worship idols as some of them did. For the scriptures say the people celebrated with feasting and drinking. They indulged themselves in pagan revelry. And we must not engage in sexual immorality as some of them did, causing 23,000 of them to die in one day. Nor should we put Christ to the test as some of them did, and then died from snake bites. And don't grumble as some of them did, for that is why God sent his angel of death to destroy them. All these events happened to them as examples for us. They were written down to warn us who live at the time when this age is coming to a close. Folks, this is serious. Don't ever think that the Old Testament was just written for the Jews. Paul makes it very clear that it is written for the church. Now, it doesn't mean to say we go through all the Jewish rituals of worship. Hebrews is quite clear that Jesus has fulfilled them and so on. But everything there was inspired, written for our instruction. And Paul here is quoting basically from Numbers, and there's 3 passages about grumbling in Numbers. There's chapter 11. The people soon began to complain to the Lord about their hardships. And when the Lord heard them, his anger blazed against them. And you go down a bit longer. Moses heard all the families standing in front of their tents weeping, and the Lord became extremely angry. What were they moaning about? They were moaning about the fact that they had porridge for breakfast, porridge for lunch, and porridge for tea every day. They didn't like what God had provided for them to keep them alive, and they started grumbling against God, and God was angry. And then chapter 14, they grumbled against their leaders for leading them out of Egypt. Now, the leaders had led them out of Egypt for their salvation. It led them out of slavery. And here the people say, oh, we'd have been better off back where we were. Why did we ever come here? Have you taken us into this desert to have us die in the wilderness? Our little wives and little ones will be carried off as slaves. Let's return to Egypt. Let's get another leader. That was a serious rebellion. And then in chapter 16, they grumbled against, I'm going to call them the ministers, Kohath and his rebellion. They incited a rebellion involving 250 prominent leaders, members of the assembly, and they went to Moses and Aaron and said, you've gone too far. Everyone in Israel has been set apart from the Lord. He's with all of us. What right do you have to act as though you are greater than anyone else amongst these people? But of course, all Moses and Aaron were doing the things that God had given them to do. And grumbling in the Old Testament was so serious that it brought judgment. Now, are you aware that grumbling is also warned about in the New Testament? I've got 4 references I found easily. James 5, do not grumble against one another, brothers, so that you may not be judged. Philippians 2:14, do all things without grumbling or questioning. I'm not quite sure what the questioning refers to. That's something I didn't get round to looking at. But do all things without grumbling, that you may be blameless and innocent. 1 Peter 4:9, show hospitality without grumbling. Now, I don't think that it probably applies here, but I could think of a church situation where there's a visiting preacher that has to be entertained every Sunday, given Sunday lunch, and you're, oh, no, I've got to find lunch for another preacher this week because a couple of families are the only ones that will do it. I could imagine that sort of thing happening. Grumbling, show hospitality without grumbling. Oh, do I really have to do the dishes on a Sunday morning? I want to go home and see something on telly or whatever it is. And then Jude, which is not the easiest book to read, but it talks about ungodly people who it describes as grumblers and malcontents, who are hidden reefs at your love feast. Now, think reef. What do you mean? A jagged rock hidden in the sea that if a wooden ship rams into it, the timber's going to give, the ship is going to spring a leak, and it's going to sink. Grumblers are hidden reefs at your love feast. Grumblers were turning up at communion and church meals. So how do we handle this? How do we handle our complaints? Very simple, nearly finished. Colossians 3:13. If you have a complaint, forgive whatever grievances you have against one another. Or New Living. Make allowance for each other's faults. Forgive the person who offends you. Remember, the Lord forgave you, so you must forgive others. We are commanded to forgive one another. Now, sometimes you may think, well, this is too serious. This is so serious, I can't just shut up about it. I must do something about it. I must point out that the way I've been hurt or whatever. Yes, that is covered in the New Testament. It is covered in the teaching of Jesus. If somebody does something against you, what you do. Matthew 18, verse 15, Jesus says you go to the person. You talk about it with the aim of winning them, bringing them back, getting reconciliation between you. If the person refuses to talk to you, if the person refuses to listen, then you take it to the church leaders, you take it to witnesses, you let the church deal with it. And Ephesians, we sometimes quote the verse about speaking the truth in love. It's interesting, it's in the passage in chapter 4 where Paul is talking about ministries, Ephesians 4:15. Speak the truth in love. Why? Because it's all something to do with becoming like Jesus. Jesus did on occasion say some very strong things. It's not wrong to say strong things, provided the motive behind it is love, that you are correcting somebody for their own good, so they don't go on repeating a mistake or whatever. We're concerned about being biblical Christians. But I think sometimes we don't understand the implication of that. Can I suggest that biblical Christianity is not holding a right doctrine of the second coming and the millennium and things like that, which usually means that being biblical is agreeing with what I believe. Biblical Christianity is doing what Jesus told us to do. Biblical Christianity is doing what Jesus told us to do. And he told us, if we have a problem with somebody, either we forgive and forget, or we go and confront them. What we don't do is grumble to one another. Do you know what so-and-so did to me the other day? I don't like the way Harry plays the piano. Neither do I sometimes. But it happens, doesn't it, folks? Come on, it happens. We grumble and we talk to one another instead of either confronting the person if it's serious or following the line of forgive, because we've all been forgiven, we all make mistakes, we've all got weaknesses, we don't always do all our best. Gossiping and complaining is forbidden in the New Testament as much as it is in the Old Testament. And so I close with a reminder of that verse in Hebrews. Funny, just after the writer had been going through all the heroes of faith and so on, and taking wonderful examples of God's saints in the Old Testament. Then in Hebrews 12:15, he or she writes, "See that no bitter root grows up to cause trouble and defile many." Now actually that's a reference to Deuteronomy 29, but we don't need to go there this morning. All I want to say is, look, one person carrying resentment can poison a whole church. And I'm not going to, but I could give examples of where that has happened. Gossip is condemned, and the word gossip is used, at least in some of the modern translations. Gossip is condemned in the Old Testament, the New Testament. Slander brings judgment. Again, at the end, people who slander are excluded from the heavenly city. So, what do you do if you're unhappy in church? Unhappy with church? Number one, find out if it's God that's making you discontent, or if it's the voice of the enemy who's always an accuser and who will always put thoughts of accusation in your mind against somebody else. And then realize if it's God, God may be making you discontent because he wants you to step up another stage. He wants to take you deeper into his presence. He wants to, it's good. You want more of God. That's a good reason to be discontent. And it could be that something has happened that's cut you off from God. And again, that's good because you want to get back. You want to get back into the sense of God's presence, back into worship with God's people. So being unhappy can be a good thing, can be a sign of spirituality. But just be careful it doesn't disintegrate into grumbling and complaining, which is always wrong.